So without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome to our stage cryptographer, computer security expert, and privacy specialist, Bruce Schneier. Bruce, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hope you enjoyed lunch. I'm going to talk a bit about the security landscape and some of the threats. And I'm going to start by talking about cyber war, not because I think cyber war is a thing, because I think it's a really interesting place to start. A couple of years ago, I participated in a debate on cyber war. It was first time I did this, an actual debate, right? There were sides, there was winning, there were rules. And what we debated is the premise, the threat of cyber war has been grossly exaggerated. I was on the side of yes, it has been. There were people on the other side, including Mike McConnell, used to be head of the NSA, now works at Booz Allen Hamilton, one of the people who grossly exaggerates the threat. I thought this would be easy, right? I would produce a list of gross exaggerations. We would vote, I would win. I actually lost that debate. It was really interesting that at the end of the 2 hours, most of the people in the audience thought that the threat of cyber war had not been grossly exaggerated. Now, I think I did my job well. I had some great exaggerations. I had Mike McConnell on stage with me, write in Washington Post, "The United States is fighting a cyber war today and we're losing." Right? The United States is at war. I had a US senator say, "We risk cyber Katrina." An article from the Australian newspaper, The Independent, "Hackers declare war on Australia." Right? Cyber war is so easily even kids can do it. I had a quote from Amit Yaran, and he wrote, "Cyber 9/11 has happened over the last 10 years, but it's happened slowly so we don't see it." Actually, don't even know what that means. I had articles on Germany attacking China, on China declares war on Western search sites. You can declare war on companies now. Cyber blitz hits US and Korea. So cyber blitz, cyber 9/11, cyber Katrina, cyber Pearl Harbor. My favorite was cyber Armageddon. And these are actual writings about cyber war. When you hear about cyber war, the event you'll most likely hear about is Estonia. Estonia happened in April 2007, and this was during a period of ethnic tensions between Russia and Estonia. And there were a series of denial of service attacks against Estonian websites, both government, media, and some commercial. You read that it was unprecedented in scale. It actually wasn't. Unprecedented scope. It actually wasn't. It was kind of regular. No one knows who actually did this. And in a lot of these stories, we never know who the perpetrator is. I mean, we assume it's Russia because it's at this time of tension between the two countries. But we don't know if it was Russian-sponsored, Russian-tolerated, if it was what I think of as kids playing politics. The only person convicted of these attacks was a 22-year-old ethnic Russian living in Tallinn. So perhaps cyber war is so easy even kids can do it. And a few years later, someone from Russia said, "I did this," and he was associated but not very well with the Russian government. As cyber war goes, it's an odd attack, right? It's denial of service. You imagine that the enemy army lands on your beaches, runs on shore, and then gets in line in front of you at the post office. Right? Not what I think of as war, but these are the kind of things we talk about as the first cyber war. Another example, also 2007, this was used in the 60 Minutes article on cyber war, were a series of blackouts in Brazil, which were either by extortionists or by soot and insulators, we can't tell. But that is also being talked about as cyber war. Lots of other examples. Georgia, the one over there, not ours, in 2008, there was something similar to Estonia, but those denial of service attacks were before an actual land invasion, tanks and troops from Russia going into Georgia. GhostNet, I don't know if people remember that. GhostNet was also in 2009, and this was a surveillance network, very complex one, a raid against about 100 countries, and these were government, media, economic targets. The list of countries who were the victims looked like a who's who of who China wants to spy on. So we assume China was behind this. Again, we don't know. Lots of attacks coming from China. I mean, just last month, the US indicted 5 Chinese military nationals in absentia for launching cyber attacks against US corporations. Stuxnet, discovered in 2010, probably the first military-grade cyber weapon we've seen. US and Israel launching an attack against an Iranian nuclear power plant. I mean, I could go on for an hour with examples of things that are being called acts of cyber war or cyber war. And as you go through the examples, and what became very clear when I did the debate is that we don't have a very good definition of cyber war. We don't know when it starts. We don't know what it looks like when it's happening. We don't know when it's over. And it's actually not just headline writers. I mean, you read military doctrine, and there isn't a really good definition here. I mean, you hear people say that cyber war exists between peace and war. I'm not sure what that means. Or that we're in a permanent state of cyber war. I'm less sure what that means. I actually don't like it. And you know, it's clear that there's a lot of rhetorical notions in the word war here. And here I think Americans are ill-served. You know, we're very weird. We hate using the word war when there's an actual war going on, but we love using the word war when there isn't. Right? War on crime, war on drugs, war on terror, war on poverty. We love rhetorical war. And cyber war has aspects of both. Right? There's aspects of actual military conflict and aspects of this rhetoric of war. And I think that makes it kind of a dangerous term to use. And the moral I really came up with, I think it was like 6 months after the debate, so I'm really reliving this debate. It's not that we're fighting a cyber war today. It's that we are increasingly seeing warlike tactics in more general cyber attacks. And I think that's what's important for all of us. Right? It used to be that you could tell the attacker from the weaponry. Right? If we went outside and we saw a tank on the street, we would know that the military was involved because only militaries have tanks. Right? The weaponry determines the attacker. That doesn't work in cyberspace. There is a democratization of weaponry, of tactics. So the same stuff is being done by the 22-year-olds and the Chinese military colonels. They're doing the same sorts of things. Right? Weaponry doesn't tell you what's going on anymore. And that really affects defense. Because when you are attacked in cyberspace, there are a variety of legal regimes that attack can operate in. And depending on the regime, you're going to call someone else for defense. You could call the police. You can call the military, DHS, your corporate lawyers, a bunch of commercial products and services. And what determines the legal regime in which your defense operates is two things. Right? Who's attacking you and why? And in cyberspace, when you're attacked, the two things you don't know are who's attacking you and why. And maybe you can figure it out eventually. And we've seen some really good forensic reports coming out 6-8 months after an attack explaining who's attacking and why. But when you're defending, you got 20 milliseconds. Right? And this makes defense very difficult. This makes policy difficult. Because how do you define a policy of cyber war, cyber peace, normal times, cyber crime, when you don't know who's behind any incident as it happens? Right? We're struggling with this. Other countries are. I mean, where do you put the line between what's military operations, what's police operations, what the companies do by themselves? I mean, think of your adversaries. You can sort of line them up, right? You know, from least skilled to best skilled, right? You know, your typical hackers and criminals and some of your politically motivated attackers, and your actual spies, corporate and government spies, and maybe terrorists and, I don't know, militaries. I mean, you know, that's the array of attackers, and we're seeing all of them. Not just government targets, commercial targets. The indictments that came around last month were because the attacks were against 4 U.S. companies. And we believe that there was a Chinese intellectual property theft. They're trying to steal information for the government. So a lot of this is APT. Now that's the buzzword of a few years ago, advanced persistent threat. It's an interesting buzzword. Actually, when it first started appearing, I really disliked it. I thought it was a bad buzzword. And I've come around, because I think it describes something that's really important, right, that's really critical in how to think about attacks. So you can look at attackers along two axes, skill and focus. Right? So think of a graph, so skill and focus. Right? So your low skill, low focus attackers, those are your basic script kiddies, your run-of-the-mill attackers, your hackers. What we think of as the background radiation of the internet. Right? The stuff that happens thousands of times a day, basic hygiene will deal with it. Right? That's skill, that's low skill, low focus. High skill, low focus, think of those as some of your better cyber crimes. Identity theft. Think of the Target breach. Right? There's a lot of skill there, but there wasn't a lot of focus on who the victim was. It could have been anybody. I mean, Target managed to get hit, but because it could have just as easily been somebody else. It didn't have to be Target. Right? Low skill, high focus are some of your targeted attacks. Somebody's beeping. As long as it doesn't go off, right? Where was I? I was at low skill, high focus. Now it's still beeping. All right, I'm going to ignore the beeping. Low skill, high focus, those are some of your targeted attacks. Think of spear phishing. Right? They're targeted, but they're not very skilled. High skill, high focus, that's APT. And the reason this matters is because the type of defense you need is different. I mean, normally in our industry, we have dealt with relative security. We have assumed the attacker has a financial motive, is a run-of-the-mill criminal, and is after somebody, some numbers, credit card numbers, and it doesn't matter who. And against that kind of attacker, what matters for you is that your security is better than the company next door. Right? If your security is relatively better than your peers, you will be secure against attacks of low focus. And we're actually pretty good at that in our industry. High skill, high focus, it's different. Right? For some reason, the attacker wants you. Likely wants your information. Right? Is targeting individuals in your company for a personal reason. And against those sorts of attackers, relative security is irrelevant. Doesn't matter if you're better than the person across the street. What matters is, are you better than the attacker? And this is a lot harder. Right? And if the skill is high enough, we don't know how to protect you. Many of you know people who do penetration testing for a living. I mean, who really do it. Not the big companies, but the actual skilled individuals. They never fail not to get in. Now, of course, not every attacker is that skilled, and that's the whole point. But if we are worried about the Chinese military, we just don't know how to defend. One of those interesting things Keith Alexander said when he was head of the CIA, and I've been looking for this quote since I heard it, and I can't find it. If anyone knows where it is, please email me. And he was talking about what keeps him awake at night. And what he basically said is, I know how deeply I've penetrated our enemies' networks, and they don't know I'm there. My fear is that they've done the same to my networks. So even for him, attack is easier than defense. And that's where we are. So when you think of APT, think of it in a couple of things. But what I'm talking about mostly is politically motivated hacking. And I mean politics very broadly. National, ethical, religious, moral. And we see all those things. We see hacks against companies people love to hate, right? It used to be Microsoft, now it's Google. Simply because of who they are. Politically charged industries, petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, agribusiness, big tobacco. We see this against US companies with foreign competitors. We see this actually also in financial crime, which is the other kind of APT, right? We're seeing more of it in actual financially motivated crime. And lastly, we're seeing it in IP theft. And IP theft is an enormous thing. The stats I've seen are scary. And it's hard to know what's real and what's made up, but it does seem like, my guess is a lot of IP theft is unreported because it's not known. Just like General Alexander didn't know what sorts of theft was coming out of the US military networks. He might have been bluffing, right? But so I kind of take it at face value. So hand in hand with this threat is a rapidly changing IT landscape. And there are two pieces of this change which are really relevant in this room. They both involve the loss of control. We are losing control over our IT environment. This is not necessarily bad, but it is true. We're losing control for two reasons. One, more and more of our data is now in the cloud. We're losing control of our data. Certainly true for individuals, more and more true for companies. Lots of companies outsource their email to companies like Google. Lots of companies outsource their CRM systems. Individuals within companies outsource a lot of their productivity tools. Right? My mother outsources pretty much everything she does. The second is we're losing control of the devices we use to access our data. Right? When computers were invented, they were standalone boxes, right? You'd sell it, give it to a person, and they were now in charge of the computer. That model is changing. If you think of your iPhone, your iPad, your Kindle, your Chromebook, these devices are tethered. The vendor controls them to a much higher degree. Right? No software is on your iPhone unless Apple agrees, unless you've jailbroken your phone, which you probably haven't. And there's restrictions on what can be on your phone. Your Kindle has even more restrictions. Now, this is being done for business reasons. Right? I think these companies want more control because it gives them more profits. But it wasn't possible without being able to move data around. So basically, Moore's law is causing these two trends, that we're losing control of our data and the devices we access our data. And actually watch the computer OSs. Look at Windows 8, look at Mountain Lion for Apple. You're seeing much more of that tethered-like behavior. Right? I have not looked at Yosemite yet. I don't know if it's out yet. But I think both companies are pushing us to a much more tethered model for our PCs. So all this together means two things for us for security. And the first one is trust, and the second is resilience. Trust is critical. And I wrote a whole book on trust, and it's a very complex issue, and I'll give you the one-sentence conclusion. Trust is social. Trust is not technical. Technology can aid trust, but trust is fundamentally social. I know who people use for hard disk encryption. We learned 2 weeks ago that TrueCrypt is disappearing. And if you read the posts, read the rhetoric, read what people are talking about, it's all about this loss of trust. Who do we trust to give us hard drive encryption? Do we trust Microsoft? Do we trust Apple? Do we trust Symantec? Why isn't there an open source solution so we can trust this nebulous array of everybody looks at everything, but we knew with Heartbleed it didn't work very well. But these are philosophical arguments about trust. So whenever you look at a company to partner with, especially in security, it's do you trust them? And there is no amount of tech that will answer that question. It's going to be what's their reputation. It's going to be what country are they in, right? What legal regime are they existing under? What's your relationship with them? What's your contractual relationship with them? What are you trusting them for? And I think that's becoming a lot more explicit. The whole year of the NSA disclosures have really been a crisis in trust. Right? We thought we could trust the standards. We thought we could trust the protocols. We thought we could trust the companies. We thought we can do it technologically. We can't. It's social. The second thing is resilience. More and more of our security has to rely on the resilience model. Resilience has to be something core. And it's funny, I'm seeing this now at the conference. You go to RSA now, and I see different names for it: lean security, agile security, reactive security. They're all basically resilience. That we're going to put in all of these security systems, but we need to be able to respond to changes. We need to be able to respond to attacks, respond to changes in the environment, respond to changes in our users, changes in the technologies, changes in the law. And we need to think about resilience from the bottom up. 2 decades ago, I started talking about security as prevention, detection, response, right? All three things. And in all these three things, you build resilience. Because nothing is going to be perfect, but everything has to work, and we need some mesh of security that will not just give us security today, but will give us security as things move into the future. Because I think we're seeing a surprising amount of sophistication in attackers these days. We've gotten good at the background radiation of the internet. We've gotten really good at basic firewalls, antivirus, all that's not clicking on attachments. We're not great, but we're good there. We can deal with those things. The hard part is the skilled attackers. And we're seeing them in all aspects of security. We're seeing them from governments, we're seeing them from criminals, we're seeing them from hacktivists. And we're seeing them against a very broad array of targets. And so we need to be able to make it harder for them to get in, not because it'll stop them, although it might, but because the harder you have to work to get in, the more likely you are to make a mistake. The more likely you are to make a mistake, the more likely you are to be identified. The more likely you are identified, the more likely you are to be stopped. Right? We need stuff that when someone is in a network, to be able to figure out they're there, figure out what they've done, figure out how to get them out, figure out how to restore security. One of the biggest problems we have is when someone is owned to cleaning out the attacker. I remember one story where things were so bad that people were communicating via pen and paper because they were afraid to send emails on how to recover because they knew the emails were being listened on. It's going to be an interesting set of years for computer security coming up. Because now we're seeing a lot more government interest. We're seeing a lot more government advising, control. Depending on the country, this idea that we don't know what legal regime the attacker is operating, therefore our default defense is going to be X, is being instantiated differently. Some countries are taking a much more government-forward stance. Some countries are taking a much more, the companies will deal with this and government only when government has to. I think that's going to start changing. And I think there's going to be a call for more proactive defense in some areas and a call for more Wild West, you're on your own, defend yourself in other areas. And we have to be prepared for both. So that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about trust, right? And how to what you can do to ensure that the people you entrust with your security are actually trustworthy. Right? Both individuals and the companies you deal with. And also resilience. What are you doing in your systems, in protection, in detection, and response, to make those systems resilient? Right? Assume whatever you're doing will fail. How do you make sure those failures are contained, that you can recover from them, that you can deal with them? Those are going to be the challenges. And what's interesting is in a lot of ways, they are human challenges. I mean, this is the lesson from the NSA disclosures. I mean, the technology is great, technology is wonderful things, but in the end, these are people problems. And the solutions are highly people-focused. So thank you.